Yolanda Postel here. I'm so glad you were able to join me again. And I want to know, have you felt the Holy Spirit prompting you to do something that just doesn't seem to make sense? It doesn't appear to be logical to you, and you're thinking, if I tell anybody about this, they're going to think that I've lost it, that I'm not rational. Well, sometimes God has us do things that doesn't seem to make sense to anybody else, but He knows the plan that He has for us. In Luke chapter 9, verses 10 through 17, Jesus had been teaching the people all day in Bethesda. And towards the end of the day, the disciples, they looked and they're like, okay, Jesus, we've been out here all day. We don't have any provisions for the people. Let's go ahead and send them home. And Jesus asked, well, what do you have? And the disciples say, well, we've got these 5 loaves and 2 fishes here. And Jesus was like, okay, you feed them. Now think about that. There are thousands of people out there, and these disciples have 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and Jesus says, you feed them. That would probably be the equivalent of you making dinner for 4 and 2,000 people show up at your doorstep and Jesus says, well, you feed them. Your first thought is going to be, me? Me do what? Your second thought is going to be, how in the world am I going to feed all these thousands of people and I made dinner for 4? You know, when we read the scriptures, we often romanticize these stories and, you know, how the disciples probably were like, oh, Lord, yes, you can do all. I can imagine that the disciples probably looked at each other and said, Jesus, we got thousands of people here. What are we going to do with these 5 loaves? But what did they do? They said, okay. They were obedient. The people sat down, they prayed, and they handed out the 5 loaves and fishes, and at the end, they were able to take up numerous baskets full of leftovers. And that is because they stepped out on faith and did what Jesus commanded them to do. But let's think about it here. Feeding thousands of people with a few loaves of bread and some fish doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that it looked like something that was completely impossible. It looked illogical. It looked irrational. Borderline insane, probably. But they did it. And so all of this is to say that sometimes the Holy Spirit will lead you to do something that doesn't make sense. I think one of the best illustrations that I can give for myself is when I was younger and I was working at this particular company, and the Holy Spirit let me know, okay, it's okay to leave. I had been wanting to leave. I knew it was time to leave. I was praying about it, and it was time. I had just said a prayer that morning. Then the lady comes to me and says, you know, she's just talking about she wasn't sure what she wanted to do with me and this other person. And I'm just like, it's time for me to go. So I put in my notice. I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't have a ton of money saved. I mean, I was just, okay, God, I'm trusting you and I'm putting in this notice because I know what you're telling me to do. And so I put in the notice. The day came where it was time for me to leave. People kept asking me, are you sure? And during the 2-week period prior to me leaving, they're like, are you sure you don't have another job? How are you leaving? What about your son? Because at that time I was a single parent. And they're like, well, don't you need money? And all of these different things trying to deter me from leaving. But I was firm in what I knew that I needed to do. So the day came. I did not have a job when I walked out that door. I did not know how I was going to pay my bills. I walked out on faith. And the next day, a friend of mine called me, asked me if I was looking for work. And I told her I just left a job, needed a new one. And so I was unemployed for a total of 48 hours. But look at the timing. One day later, after I left, a friend of mine called me and asked me, did I need a job? So again, it was one of those situations where it looked like it just didn't make sense. And to anybody outside looking in, they would have thought, this girl don't know what she's doing, right? But God, he made a way. And he showed me that, hey, Yolanda, I've got your back. And when things don't make sense, when I tell you to move and you walk in obedience, that I'm the one that's going to open the door for you. And that's the lesson that I feel that I learned and that we need to learn, is that, when he leads you into a situation, a new place, somewhere that's unfamiliar, and instructs you to make a move that just, like I said, doesn't make sense to other people, he will give you a peace in your heart about it. And as you move and you walk in faith, he will give you what you need. What doesn't look like enough will be enough. The provisions that you need, he will give it to you. Mine was, I needed a job, I needed income. And so he provided me what I needed when I took that step of faith. So what step of faith is Holy Spirit asking you to take? What change is Holy Spirit asking you to make? And if you are obedient and you listen, then God is going to show himself strong and mighty in your life. When the disciples made the decision, okay, we're going to feed these people, I'm sure in their minds they're thinking, I don't know if this is going to work. They probably said, let's hope this works. Let's hope this food makes it all the way to the last 1,000th person. But God stretched what they had and provided their needs. So just remember this one thing, that with God, all things are possible. And what looks impossible, he can make possible. So I hope this encourages you today, and just take that into this week. Whatever you're facing, just remember, with God, all things are possible. And know that he will give you what you need. And that's really it. Just wanted to jump on real quick. Hit the subscribe button so you can receive updates from me. And just have a great week. Be prayerful and allow God to lead and guide you.